Viewers, and welcome to the weekend edition of TVC Breakfast, where we bring you all the exciting news in the world of entertainment, sports, and current affairs, so you will not miss a beat. My name is Olamide Adeyemi, and of course, I'm not here alone. I have with me my colleague, Theophilus Elema.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I feel good.
It's a great weekend, and you know that our kind of job, we don't we don't somehow observe weekends.
Oh, well, and that's why it's important to,
yeah.
have fun while we are on the
Yes,
job.
that's why it's called workshop.
Oh, really?
You work and you have fun.
All right, so very quickly, today we'll be looking at an array of issues. We'll begin with the minimum wage that has been eliciting a lot of reactions.
Truly.
Throughout the week. The president had a meeting with the NLC, and both parties have settled on 70,000 naira. So we've had many persons say, is this enough? Is this not enough?
Yeah.
And of course, we'll be reviewing, the major stories on the front pages of the newspapers and the local government council and grassroots development. And that's before we hand over to our colleagues, Theophilus also, and Adibanke Odunuyi. Let's begin with today's discussion. After months of back and forth between the organized labor and the federal government on what the new minimum wage should be, both parties have settled on 70,000 naira as the pay for civil servants. Recall that the organized labor had demanded that 615,000 naira should be the new minimum wage, while the federal government ordered 48,000 naira. The federal government is now set to spend 3 trillion naira on the new minimum wage and the payment of pensions and gratuities. Joining us for this conversation is the International Coordinator and National Secretary of the Nigerian Union of Journalists, Achike Chude, and we also have the spokesman, NLC, Benson Opa. Good morning, gentlemen. It's good to have you join us on the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So let's begin with you, Mr. Achike. Let's start with what's your reaction to the meeting between the NLC and the president. What was your reaction to the outcome of that meeting?
Well, coincidentally, Benson Okpa, who you have at the other end, wrote on behalf of the NLC yesterday with regards to the outcome of that meeting, and he did express the fact that Labour was not exactly happy with arriving at 70,000 naira minimum wage, but there are so many things to look at, and I think I'm in line with his thoughts. We would have thought that much more would be given to the workers, and I think the NLC and the TUC had negotiated for much more, and they held out for such a long time. But so I'm generally not satisfied with the money. Though there were other things, with 70,000 naira as the basic minimum wage, but people must understand again what minimum wage means. And that is, it is the least amount of money that any Nigerian worker should be paid. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
All right, that it is the least amount of money or salary that any Nigerian worker should be paid across the country. But so states are always encouraged. Members of the organized private sector are always encouraged to pay much more, above the minimum wage if they can afford it. So it is the bottom line, under which no state or no member of the organized sector should be able to pay. And then, so that is it. So in essence, you look at it and you realize that, look, the Labour had always made a case in the past about, even when Labour made 650 naira as the minimum wage, even when they put that on the table, and then they did a template on how that money can be spent. You could not fault Labour. At 250,000 naira, you cannot fault Labour. Because, the president himself, during his inauguration, had said he was going to give the workers, a living wage. this is not a living
All
wage.
right, all right.
So the question you ask yourself, let me just completely finish, is why did Labour accept? But you see, there are so many other dynamics, so many other nuances that Labour has to take into consideration. Absolutely. And it is clear based on our socioeconomic realities in the country. And that's why when they tell you that, look, they agreed to this, but they reluctantly did, we must factor in those things that were taken into consideration.
All right, Achike, let's move to Benson Upa on this matter. Achike just ended by saying that NLC reluctantly accepted this new minimum wage of 70,000 naira. Is that the case, Benson?
Are you still there with us?
Benson, are you still there with us at this time? Okay, so let's stick with Achike Chude for now till we get Benson. Achike, in all of these things, now many have said that if the government had paid 615,000 naira or 250,000 naira, it will ultimately affect the economy because organized private sector were also involved in the meeting as well. Do you share in that thought?
You see, these are the nuances I believe that Labour also looked at, because you see, it's a tripartite meeting.
Okay.
It's a tripartite meeting that involves, the government, the organized private sector, and Labour. And so you have to take, the thinking, and the feelings and the worries and the concerns of all parties into consideration. So it's not just a Labour, government issue. There are workers of the Nigerian Labour Congress, affiliates of Nigerian Labour Congress, that are not within the ambit of either the federal or state government. They are within the organized private sector. And so the organized private sector has its own peculiarities. While the government, for instance, can, always depend on the inflow that comes from, monies from the Niger Delta, from oil production from the Niger Delta, which is much, and then very little, internal revenue generated in their states, very little. The bulk of the money comes from, other parts, other aspects, especially from the oil generating Niger Delta, money generating Niger Delta, So the private sector is absolutely different. They are dependent on, the cost of production, the cost of services, and the margins that they get from it. From there, they get their profit and all that. Okay. After, so it's a completely different scenario. And we also understand what is going on today in Nigeria's economy. Many of the big corporations that we have always known that have withstood the test of time for years have left this country. I don't need to mention names. We know all of them. And so the environment under which they are operating is very, very harsh. So I think that Labour had to factor in this, because you don't want the remaining, industries to collapse completely. The workers will be left holding the short end of the stick. Okay, so that's why I talked about it.
But in all of this that you have said, and the federal government has said they will meet every 3 years to review the minimum wage. Do you think that's the way forward?
Well, the federal government cannot be trusted. I'm talking about the federal government, not the federal government under Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the federal government as, a major institution of the Nigerian state, because they have a history of reneging on their promises. Virtually every government in this country, regardless of political parties, that has been a major characteristic of most of these, governments. They have an agreement as to the renege. They have an agreement with Nigerian Medical Association, they renege, and all that. So they have always had agreement, even with the NLC, they renege. So we hope that there can be a consistency, and their honesty in addressing the issues that are of primary interest of Nigerian workers. It is good that they have said, look, every 3 years, let's look at it. But they, meanwhile, have to go about and shore up their revenue base. And that should not be done by taxing the people. They should look for ingenious ways of generating monies, for themselves. And that's why, again, you have to look at, they have to sit back, put on their thinking cap, and also realize that this issue, this monthly situation of just waiting and sending the accountants generals from each of the states to the capital, to the federal government, to go and share revenue coming from the oil sector and other parts of the country's economy is not something that is sustainable over time.
All right, Achike. Yes. The NLC president also raised a very delicate issue about the problem of enforcement. We understand that in major states, some of them are still having issues, paying even the current minimum wage. The NLC president has the right or the legal right to actually evoke the national minimum wage in major states across the country. What should be the plan of the NLC as regards enforcement? We understand that there will be a meeting across the state level, the NLC party, the union, the state level of the union with the state governors.
Yeah, I think that meeting is important. But that is, again, the NLC had to make a lot of sacrifice. They made a tremendous sacrifice over this particular agreement. And that's why I said that it was a bittersweet experience for them. And so the argument has always been by state actors, like the governors in the past, even when they couldn't pay 18,000, when they couldn't pay 30,000 and so on, that they did not have the money to pay. But that is absolutely false. Because the question you ask yourself is massive corruption taking place in all of these states, in virtually all, because we have agreed that corruption is endemic in Nigeria. That is the reality. And nothing drastic has actually been done or radical has actually been done to stop it. So the reason why they have not been paying, the workers is because, a lot of the monies that should be going to the workers and to other, sectors of their states for social, for infrastructural development goes into private pockets at the end of the day. So if you can stop corruption or reduce it to a reasonable level, then they will have enough money to be able to pay workers' salaries and be able to do other things. We have seen the tendency or the proclivity for ostentatious living by the political class in this country. We've seen, them make the argument that the economy is hard and that they cannot sustain increasing workers' salaries while they continue to buy, fleets of cars for themselves, while the federal government is contemplating buying 2 private jets or presidential jets, while so many other, aspects
Achike,
of the life of our political elites.
We'll be back to you. The conversation is still on the minimum wage, and we don't want to, deviate from the conversation. Theophilus, picking it up from some of the issues that Achike raised, at this point in time, we have been having the conversation of the viability of state to pay this minimum wage, and also ensuring that state do not have to rely on the fact for, getting revenue and looking at other sources within the state to generate revenue among themselves. It's also expected that they should, the labor unions at the state level should meet with the state governors to, liaise with how this can work.
Well, I believe it can work if we put our acts together. But some states have already agreed to pay a minimum wage of 70,000 naira. Some are already paying, like Edo State. Delta State said they can pay the 70,000. Even Benue State as well has said they can pay the 70,000 naira. It would be nice to see that every state can pay that money. But we should also realize that the variables in those states are different from each other. Okay. For instance, now someone earning 70,000 naira minimum wage in Lagos State cannot be compared with someone earning 70,000 naira in a place like Osun State, where cost of living is quite on the low side compared to Lagos State and all of that. Because once the price of fuel goes up in Lagos, the price of transportation goes up, and so that alone in a month can take the whole of the minimum or more than, far more than the minimum wage. Of
course, it's expected that inflation will follow the enforcement of this.
Definitely,
minimum wage.
But beyond all of this, we should ensure that processes are put in place, things are put in place to ensure workers. Yes.
So very quickly, we also have the spokesman back, NLC spokesman Benson Opa, back with us. Thank you for joining us once again. I hope you can hear us now.
Yes, I'm hearing you now.
Oh, good.
So let's start with what the NLC's plan for enforcement as regards this new minimum wage law would be.
Yeah, the first thing to understand is that this is a national law, and it applies to all the entities of government. the states, the local governments, and their agencies. So not to obey the law will give a very bad example. So they are under obligation to obey with the prescription or the prescriptions of the National Minimum Wage Act. But in the event, some governors elect to obey the law in breach, of course, we have our mechanism for enforcement under the law,
okay.
By way of engagement, letters, conversations, pickets, and withdrawal of services. These are legitimate means for enforcing the law. So we are prepared to do that. We have the will, we have the vision, we have the will, we have the capacity.
And what's going to be the place of the private sector, who earlier in the week mentioned that they may not be able to pay that amount without the help of the federal government?
I mean, the private sector can pay. In the past, they were able to pay. In fact, let us say this of the private sector. They have always paid better than the government. At the moment, if they want to be honest with you, I am not sure anybody in the organized private sector is actually earning below 70,000.
Let me pause you there, Mr. Opa. How you're saying you are sure that anybody, but do you have statistics to prove this?
Yes,
and
have
you worked in the private sector to have this?
When you ask me a question, you wait for my response.
Okay.
So you have asked me, do I have statistics to prove? And I'm directing you to NECA. I'm directing you to MAN. Let any of them issue a disclaimer saying that they have not been paying up to the figure that I've just put to you. Let me tell you this, the private sector has always performed better than the public sector in terms of remunerations, okay? But however, as an addendum, government needs to make the operating environment less toxic than it is presently. Government needs to look at what has led to the collapse or the departure of companies, big businesses, medium-level businesses, and smaller businesses. It's because of government policies, okay? Now time has come for government to re-examine itself. What have we done right? What have we done wrong? And also take note, in our MOUs with government on June 5th, 2023, and October 2nd, 2023, we told government and government agreed that incentives should be given to these businesses, okay? This has happened in more advanced economies. And I keep citing the example of Obama's America. Obama came and met recession in 2009. What did he do? He gave money to big business. He raised workers' salaries. And this cranked the economy. And for 12 years, American economy was on a bullish run. So what is wrong with government today saying, organized private sector, we know your pains. We are going to do ABCD for you. Government should do that instead of going around the world looking for new investors. Government is behaving like a man who wants to take a second wife and does not want to take care of the wife at home.
Okay, so
forgetting that the girlfriend outside is monitoring to see whether whether this man is responsible enough to take care of her when she moves in.
All right, so this 70,000 naira that organized labor has come up with, the agreement with the federal government, do you think it's in the interest of the workers? Because it seems like the NLC had given hopes to Nigerian workers that it will be, the least will be 250,000 naira. And suddenly, we saw videos all around of NLC agreeing with the government for 70,000 naira. Is this in the interest of Nigerian workers?
Well, I will respond quickly. the 70,000 naira is not enough. Apparently, I mean, the statistics are quite grim. Inflation, food inflation trading at 40-something%. The ordinary inflation at 34%. Exchange rate at 1.6. Interest rates at 26.5. And all of that. I mean, these statistics are grim. And energy rate at 250% hiked. These are grim statistics. And their after effects are bound to erode the value.
So why did the federal government, why did the Labour agree with the federal government on 70,000 naira, if in your own view it's not enough? I'm answering
your question. I'm saying that 70,000 is not enough, but certainly any good negotiator should know when to cut the deal, to come back another day. And we now have a 3-yearly cycle instead of 5-yearly cycle. So in the next 2 years, because I've already taken 6 months out of the 3 years, in the next 2.5 years, in fact, in the next 2 years, we'll begin another round of negotiations. And don't also forget that there are other incentives coming. We have also told the government certain things that it must not do, certain things that it must do. Government has promised that, yes, CNG will now come on stream, and other policy decisions will be readily implemented. So give and take. Even at 70% is not enough.
All right.
A quarter bread is better than nothing. And had we not fought, let me tell you, had we not fought, had NLC not fought hard, some governors were not ready to even pay, to pay the 30,000. So it is a hard-won battle. In spite of everything, I think NLC is deserving of commendation for ensuring that it even got this 70,000.
All right. Achike, do you have any reaction to what Benson Opa said?
No, I think what he has done is he has re-echoed some of my sentiments, or I'm re-echoing some of the sentiments that he expressed in the press release that he made with regards to this, the outcome of their negotiations with the government and the organized private sector. You know, the reality is that, I told you that I'm not exactly happy, excited about the outcome, but it became inevitable because you have to look at so many things. And, you know, when you get into negotiation, you don't go there, you negotiate in good faith. You don't go there to win at all costs. And if you look at the quantum of increase in the salaries of the worker, it's about 130% on the 30,000 naira that was being paid. 130% sounds reasonable. It's just that we are talking about the state of the economy today and the high inflation, you know, again, that has been occasioned by the mismanagement or mishandling of the economy. But beyond that, you know, like you said, he who lives to fight, you know, and runs away lives to fight another day. NLC did not even run away from this. They were able to achieve some concessions from the government, but a lot is dependent on what the government does thereafter. For instance, the organized private sector, when they said they needed help from the government, they were not asking for the government to give them money, but there are incentives that you can look. In Nigeria, for instance, taxation is used. Taxation normally should go both ways. There are times you have to reduce taxation because you want to achieve certain, you know, things within the economy.
This conversation we will still continue. You know, there will still be negotiations between the state governors and the state chapter of the NLC as regards this minimum wage, and that's why we're raising issues about states generating as much internal revenue to be able to, you know, manage this situation. But that's a very fine place to leave the conversation for now. We have been speaking with the Nigerian Union of Journalists, the National Secretary, Achike Chude, and also the spokesman of the NLC. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.